Welcome to RealClearPolitics on SiriusXM for Thursday, March 20th. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined tonight by Carl Cannon, our Washington Bureau Chief and Executive Editor, and Sean Trendy, our Senior Elections Analyst. Gentlemen, welcome. It's good to have you. Sean, I want to start with you. There was an interesting discussion that was taking place over the last couple of days. Ezra Klein had David Shore on his podcast where he talked about some of these different numbers. He'd done, I think, 26 million interviews and had some polling about the 2024 election. And there were a couple of things that struck me, Sean, and I want to get your reaction to them. The first thing was that basically, white voters didn't really change from 2016 to 2020 to 24, and that most, if not all, the movement was among people of color, Hispanic, particularly Hispanic moderates and conservatives, African American moderates and conservatives, and Asian American voters. That suggests, Sean, that there has been this sort of shift in the political landscape that could be very perilous for Democrats moving forward if they're not able to reverse the trends that we've seen.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely correct. Everything, it's not just the Shore interview. This is something that we've kind of known since Election Day, since we saw the exit polls, that there were big movements to the right among Hispanics, among Black voters, Asian voters. I think the reason that this is making news is just it's taken a long time. There's been a bit of denial about it, right? People have the muscle memory with Trump of assuming that, support for Trump is latent racism and, hatred of minorities and everything. And that storyline just doesn't jibe with what we've seen in the polling. That what's really gone on is that historically moderate and conservative Hispanics, Blacks, and Asians have still tended to vote Democrat, and that has just ended in the last few years.
Carl, do you see, when you look at what's going on right now with the Democrats who are in the media and they're talking about, oh, we need fighters, and do you see the Democrats making sort of a real appeal to win back those particular voters that they suffered with in 2024, the ones we just talked about?
Well, this whole line of it, we didn't fight hard enough. We didn't. I don't.
Both sides always say that.
Yeah, but
it's like one of my pet peeves. Honestly, it's like we just fight harder. We just fight harder, and the other side's really good at fighting, and we're super soft. And if we're a little tougher, we'd be better. It makes no sense to me, but both sides do it.
Yeah, in this case, though, it really seems to be tone deaf because they threw everything they had at Donald Trump. I don't know what sort of, brass knuckles that they left.
They tried to put him in prison. They tried to get him kicked off the ballot. Like, what else?
Shot him.
What's beyond Hitler? If he's what's worse than Hitler?
Yeah, they called him worse than Hitler. They did all for 9 years, and the voters, half the voters believe it. The slightly more than half thought it was beside the point. Tom, you and I were down in Palm Beach, and Mark Penn did a presentation to a small group down there when we were doing the Samizdat Prize. And he said that he looked at this, and most of this movement was among Latinos. That's what he thought, most of it, working class Hispanics. And there's two aspects of that. Since Sean's on today, I'll remind him, Sean and I have had this sort of very polite debate going on for about 8 years now. And I wrote something like, if the Democrat, if Hispanics ever end up like African Americans, monolithic 90% vote, the Republican Party goes the way of the Whigs. And Sean's response was, yeah, maybe, but first, if Republicans can't even get the people who voted for Rick Santorum to the polls to vote for Mitt Romney, they have a problem in the other direction. Well, we were both right, but as it happens, I'd say, Sean, I can say that. I say we're both half wrong, but I'll say we're both right. But another thing happened in the midst of that. Donald Trump did get all those Rick Santorum voters there. He did. And the other thing that happened was that, and Republicans had been saying this for years, and we first wrote about it in the 80s and 90s and finally sort of began to discount it about the time it happened, was that Latinos, working class Latinos, had some conservative cultural attitudes that were eventually going to make them simpatico with the Republican Party. And that happened too. So, well, but all right, I'm going to turn it over to Sean now because I've used your name.
No, the debate, not our debate, but the kind of big debate among the demographics is destiny people fighting that out, was always, are Hispanics more like blacks or are they more like Italians? Um, and I was on the side of Italians. I had a grandmother who was off the boat from Italy, and when she would come to visit me, and we lived in San Antonio for a while, like she loved listening to like the Spanish music station, and she loved because the cultures were kind of similar. Like the music style was similar, and she could make out like half the words. And it turned out that was right. That I think there was a frankly almost racist attitude among white liberals that, well, immigration is a cultural issue for Hispanic voters, and therefore that's what those people are going to vote on. It's like, no, Hispanic voters in poll after poll after poll said they want good jobs, they want a good economy, they want their kids to have a good education and a chance to get ahead. And oh, by the way, there are people who chose to immigrate to this country. By and large, they love this country and don't want to be told what a horrible, oppressive hellscape it is. And I mean that's exactly how it played out. Another thing is people just ignored that in poll after poll after poll, it turned out that a large chunk of the Hispanic voters were actually really, really, really conservative on illegal immigration. And that's another thing, that if you wanted to get my Italian relatives worked up, you would bring up illegal immigration because they would lose their minds. And we waited in line for years and our family was split up because we couldn't take everyone at the same time. We had to leave a brother behind, and we could have cheated, but we didn't. And it's just this idea that because you're from a foreign country, you are fine with millions of people coming across the border illegally was just a fantasy, and frankly, one that was like a condescending white liberal view of how minorities would vote and act.
You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan. We're speaking with Sean Trendy and Carl Cannon. Sean, one other piece of data that came out of this whole thing with David Shore was that these, when you split the electorate into different groups, that all of these pieces of the electorate, white men without college degrees, all the way down the line, when you split it by race and education, voted overwhelmingly for Trump, except for liberal white women, which were like plus 38 or something for Donald Trump or for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. I mean, this is it was like a 70-point swing between the rest of the electorate. There obviously is something to that, but is that now the base of the Democratic Party? Liberal white women are the rock and the core of the Democratic Party, and if that's the case, how do they expand that and widen the tent?
That's been the Democrats' pitch for the past like 15 years, ever since Hillary Clinton decided that she was going to lean in and have fight song, be her theme.
After Trump called her a nasty woman.
Yeah. Yeah. I just, it's like that. That's been, it's all been about abortion rights, and it's been about leaning in, and even things like transgender rights are in the kind of broad gender bucket. The message just hasn't been there to try to bring other types of voters to the table. Now, the reason that the Democratic Party is still standing and very close to having control of the House, not such a bad situation in the Senate, but for the election calendar, is that, Donald Trump is a one-man Democratic turnout machine. But I do think that if Democrats don't figure out how to come up with a more kind of ecumenical message, they're going to have real problems.
Carl, this was part of the last election. You remember James Carville said that the Democratic Party has turned into a bunch of Karens that are, just sort of chirping at the dudes, toxic masculinity. Remember there was this white guys for Waltz, white dudes for Waltz, or white dudes for Harris. I'm sorry, and they released these ads like these I'm a real man because I vote for, Democrats or something. I mean, it just all seemed really sort of forced and not terribly authentic. Um, do you think that is that how do Democrats rectify that? I mean, how do they go about sort of merging, the messaging that they want, targeting women, but also bring in some of these men? I mean, they simply could not do it last time around.
Well, this nanny state reputation that the Democratic Party has, it's been a while. It's been building a while. It certainly predates Trump's entry into it. Tom, this was before your time. You were in
Oh, maybe not. I'm getting pretty
junior
old
high
these
school, I
days.
want to say, in 1984, maybe yeah, middle school, or maybe you were a star freshman quarterback in high school when in 1984 the gender gap, the phrase that entered the lexicon that year, the political lexicon, was going to sweep Walter Mondale to victory because he picked a woman, Jerry Ferraro. And it turned out that year when the dust settled and Reagan carried 49 states, there was a gender gap. Women liked Reagan and men loved him. So the gender gap hurt the Democrats. Since 2004, though, 20 years after that, Democrats have been running, 10, 12 points ahead among women in almost every election. And this was always seen as a problem for the Republicans by the media, which sort of looks at the glass as being half empty. It was also a problem but it was also a problem for the Republicans for the Democrats, because they were losing men. And this year it just all came to a head. But I think, we could be having a very, very different conversation 2 years from now if Republicans get hammered in the midterms. This was actually a close election. We shouldn't forget that. Decisive, yes, but close in the popular vote. Trump won by a point or two. He won these swing states by between 1 and 3 points.
All right, let me stop you there because we only got about a minute left in the segment. And Sean, I do have to ask you, the last piece of this was Shore had this slide that he put out that showed that if everybody had voted, okay, I mean, he had like what happened, what the election was. Trump won by like 1.5, 1.8 or something. But if everybody had voted, that Trump would have won by, if every voting age, I think, adult had voted in the election, that Trump would have won by like 4.8, 5 points, which is kind of shocking. I mean, what's your analysis of that? Do you buy that? Is that just like way too speculative? Or do you kind of buy into the premise that that in this past election, if more people had turned out, it actually would have benefited Trump and the Republicans, not the Democrats?
It's hard to say because non-voters are non-voters for a reason, right? They pay very, very little attention to politics. And if you get them interested enough to actually vote, they start paying attention to politics and their attitudes change. So it's real that's a speculative exercise. I think what is a useful takeaway is kind of like, assuming all else is equal, what would happen if the non-voters had turned out, looking at their demographics and attitudes, because it does illustrate that Republicans now have a lower propensity. For years, Republicans had advantages in special elections and off-year elections because they had high propensity, high educated, suburbanite base. That's no longer the case. They're starting to have the problem that the Democrats had up until fairly recently, which is, how do we get these voters to turn out when we don't have Donald Trump throwing parties and doing the Trump dance to get people excited about voting?
Yeah. All right. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. In discussion tonight, the first day of spring, Carl wanted me to mention, it's Carl Cannon, our Washington bureau chief, and Sean Trendy, our senior elections analyst. Carl, let me come to start with you on this one. We talked a little bit yesterday about this stuff that's gone on with Tesla and the fire bombings and the sort of domestic terrorism that's taken place. And there was some follow-on to that today. I mean, there were some discussions last night that you had on the Daily Show. I saw a clip of, they played some of the some of the footage of that, and the audience was cheering, and the host even said, "Oh, you like a little, petty domestic terrorism, eh?" And everyone yucked it up. And then you had Jimmy Kimmel on his show talking about it, and he said, "Well, we shouldn't light fires to cars. That's not good." But Elon, I mean, he kind of, the whole shtick was kind of like, well, Elon kind of deserves this. There was also discussion. I mean, there does seem to be very few Democrats and members of the media who want to step up and say just flat out, this is wrong. This has to stop. Condemn it totally, utterly. Throw the book at these guys. There seems to be this sort of wink, wink. Yeah, it's bad, but Elon Musk has fired a bunch of people, therefore he's kind of getting what he deserved. I sense that attitude throughout the coverage that I'm seeing, and quite frankly, it disturbs me a little bit.
I agree with you completely. That Tim Walz thing, he's dancing around, like a chubby old guy, with his phone. I've got an app on my phone, and every time, Tesla stock goes down, he gets, like he's physically stimulated. This should actually just pump the brakes here. I'll get to the vandalism in a minute. You talked about that yesterday, Tom. Somebody's going to get hurt, but this is an iconic American company that until 18 months ago, liberals loved Tesla because it was addressing global warming, because it was a threat to the internal combustion engine, the first viable threat to the internal combustion engine in 100 years. And these are American jobs. These are American drivers. These magazines, American salesmen, American components. It's an American invention, and cheering for this company to fail because the owner has sided with Trump makes the Democrats look like they don't really believe in anything. I think it's a terrible look for them. Aside from what you're talking about is, ignoring basically political violence, because that's what this is. This is not civil disobedience. This is politically motivated violence. Arson's a crime, and you start shooting up dealerships, somebody could get hurt. And so, yeah, I agree with you. And to me, this is like that Hitler business. I wonder, don't they talk to anybody who doesn't agree with them? Because this is not a good look for them. It makes them, not, as I said, look hypocritical, but also like they're condoning the worst instincts in the American body politic. I agree with you completely. Maybe Sean can give us the bright side of it. I don't know.
Sean, is there a bright side to this?
No.
No.
Well, let me ask you this. If we were looking at another country, and I told you in the last 10 years, someone had shot up a baseball game where the leadership was practicing and nearly killed the House Majority Whip, that there had been 2 assassinations on a presidential candidate, that the husband of the Speaker of the House had been nearly killed by a home invasion attack, that there had been a foiled assassination attempt on a Supreme Court justice, all politically motivated. Well, the Paul Pelosi thing, I guess, has been debated back and forth, but I think politically motivated. That one of the president's chief's assistant, there's been, national arson campaign against his company. And oh, by the way, the president himself is getting ready to ignore Supreme Court rulings. What would you say about that country? And I think you would say that country's in like the early stages of a low-grade civil war. I think it is very, very grim.
Well,
I was hoping he'd cheer us up, Tom.
that was not cheery at all. Setting aside the whole Supreme Court thing, because maybe he's going to, maybe he's not. But you did put out a pretty nice list of, look, political violence has become, I don't want to say the rule instead of the exception, but it's certainly been normalized over the last few years, and it's certainly tolerated. And I guess back to my original point, what disturbs me the most about it is that, people are making fun as this is like, something to be laughed at and
like the Hunger Games
cheered on. Yeah, a little. Yeah. I mean, that to me is we've lost the plot. And, again, the Democrats are the ones right now in the left, they were talking about, well, I saw this meme online, Democrat, it was like, Republicans are like, boycott Bud Light and boycott Target and boycott, whatever. And then, the left says boycott Tesla, and the right's like, crying, whatever. And it's like, Well, those are apples and oranges. I mean, if you don't want to buy a Tesla, don't buy a Tesla. You want to
Yeah.
pick at dealerships and stuff, that's fine. But I did not see the right, firebombing Bud Light trucks. And I mean, I guess the closest thing was Kid Rock, shooting up a case of Bud Light in his backyard or something. But even
But he
that,
bought it. He bought it.
exactly.
You know,
It's like it pales in
No.
comparison. It's not the same thing. And I just feel like we when those comparisons are made, it's trying to draw some sort of moral equivalency here that just doesn't exist.
Yeah, and we've left out of this entire conversation the shooting of the United Healthcare CEO that again became like an online meme.
Right.
A guy who was a father and a guy doing a job. It's not like he was sitting around like pushing buttons, disconnecting people from care. I mean, it's like I said, if you saw this in any other country, you would say like that's a country that's falling apart, and
You
it's
would
very
say
grim.
Banana Republic, Carl.
Yeah.
Late stage Republic stuff, right?
Well, and I really think the Democratic Party leaders could help themselves, and some of them do, like Ro Khanna. They need to be more. They need to.
I saw Rokan on TV. He was
He's
very
been
good.
he's been very
Very
solid
like
about all of this.
morally clear on his
Yeah.
stance. And
Yeah. By the way, I don't, he's not a household name, but I follow him closely. And to me, he is, I would say we should have him on the show. He's like, to me, the conscience of the Democratic Party. Very progressive, very liberal guy, but believes he's consistent with he has values. He has principles he believes in. It's not all situational ethics with that guy. And so I think the Democrats would actually, I think good policy, and to Sean's point, preventing civil war would actually be good politics. And I think more and more Democrats should do this. They shouldn't take the cue from people like Jimmy Kimmel. They should take their cue from people like Ro Khanna.
okay, but Sean, we got a couple minutes left in the segment. I'll give you the last word here. Can this be rolled back? And what would it take? Like, how do we put the toothpaste back in the tube and make people go back to sort of, get back across the line of what's acceptable and what's not? Because it doesn't seem like it's going to take an effort to make that happen.
You know who you should actually have on the show is a marriage counselor. And I actually don't mean that like jokingly, because that's kind of where we are right now. It's like people use the analogy of a national divorce. And I don't think it's that. I mean, the only thing really keeping things together is we don't have a strong sectional angle to things, right? But I mean, it's like two sides just fundamentally don't trust each other. They don't like each other anymore. They won't date each other, right? Like liberal conservative dating is almost dead. And they don't communicate with each other. And I don't know how you make that work. I don't know how you make that work on a personal level. And I certainly don't know how you make it work on a countrywide level and what needs to be done to put the toothpaste back in the tube. I honestly just do not know. I'm not very optimistic.
Carl, we need Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn. The opening scene of The Wedding Crashers.
That's right.
You shut your mouth when you're talking to me.
Maybe they can do it. Who gets the miles? Who gets the frequent flyer miles? That's what we got to figure out. Oh my gosh. All right, we're going to take another quick break and we'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, talking with Sean Trendy, our senior elections analyst, and Carl Cannon, our Washington bureau chief. Sean, let's talk about President Trump, where he stands, his approval rating, and whether he's broadly popular or not. I mean, his approval rating started above water, as we like to say in the business, right? Which means his approval was higher than his disapproval, but has in the last couple of weeks gone underwater, meaning his disapproval is now higher than his approval. But he's still more popular than he ever was the first time around. Certainly more popular than Joe Biden was when he was in office and left office at the end of his term. But I mean, as you look at the numbers, and we do get numbers not just on his general job approval, but on some issue by issue basis on inflation, how he's handling that, immigration, foreign policy, those types of issues. I mean, what's your sense of how Trump is and how he's doing and how the public sees his leadership thus far?
Well, I think For the Biden, real quickly on the Biden analogy, I mean, Biden didn't go net negative until after the Afghanistan withdrawal. At this point, he was still relatively popular. But I
True.
think I think it is important to compare this to the first part of Trump's first term, where by now he was already like 10 points underwater. Um, look, people this time were trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. And they were going along with the kind of move fast and break things. But, I don't think I don't think most people voted for a trade war with China. No, they voted for a trade war with China, not a trade war with Canada. They didn't vote for the Dow going down 10, seeing their 401k drop by 10%. And what's happening to him is it's almost like a death by a thousand cuts. Even the Doge cuts, which I think are broadly speaking popular, like if you take a hacksaw to things, you start like cutting things, just little things here and there that people notice. Like a friend of mine sent me a story about the cuts to the VA. Well, the VA cut out, or the not, yeah, the cuts to the VA ended up cutting a grant for homeless shelters for vets in Montgomery County. And so that probably not many people know about it, doesn't affect them, but you lose like maybe 10 people or 20 people who voted for Trump that way. And you start extrapolating that 10 or 20 people across thousands of agencies and thousands of contracts getting cut. And all of a sudden you start, and you put it against the background of this random trade war with Canada and the Dow going down 10%. And he can find himself down in sub 40% territory again real quick.
Carl, I mean, do you think Trump is, as Sean mentioned, I mean, some of these things are sort of popular in the main, but maybe it's the style. And I think we talked about this. Like if Trump had done this differently, if he'd said, listen, this is what I'm going to do. We're going to make some cuts. It's going to be painful, but we have to do this because of X, Y, and Z. And so I'm putting Elon in charge. And he didn't really do any of that. It just sort of happened, right? Had he done that, would he be in a better spot right now? Would he have more? Would his support be more durable moving forward?
Well, I think so, but think of what Sean just said is the most important thing to me. Trump keeps saying, and Elon Musk says, and Stephen Miller says, and all of the cabinet, they all sing from the same hymn roll. People voted for this. This is what we said we were going to do. But he's done things that he never mentioned he was going to do. And, some of these symbolic things.
Like what? Like what? Be specific.
Well, like take Jackie Robinson's page off the Pentagon website.
Malicious compliance, Carl.
Yeah, cut VA jobs. I got an email yesterday from a retired naval officer who wouldn't vote for Kamala Harris. She put a gun to his head. He certainly voted for Trump all three times. And his job's been threatened. He got a job with some agency doing what Sean's talking about, administering to veterans. And it's a government job. He applied for it, got it. And this guy was a decorated naval officer. He's now being treated like what? And these people like Musk and Trump, and I don't go around criticizing them gratuitously. You know that, and listeners to our show know that. But they didn't serve in the military. And these government cuts, a lot of these people are veterans. It's why they work for the government, because they got a preference that Congress passed and presidents have boasted about, including Donald Trump when he was president the first time. And you're going to cut veterans. Some of these people have, got Purple Hearts. It's this kind of thing. This needed to be done very carefully. The people who say fiscal conservatives, a third of the people in the economy now work for the government. If you count teachers, firemen, local, that's too many. Yeah, okay. I would agree with that. Maybe it should be, economists, some conservative economists say it should be 28% instead of 33, whatever. But think of the argument they're making then. If 33% of the people work for the government, if you start cutting those jobs and most of them have families, you're gonna take the job of people who are going to be mad about it, and many of them voted for you. And so I think this needed to be done much more carefully. Wait. And I would have said they should have tried to shrink the federal workforce through attrition. That would have taken all 4 years.
They did. They offered them buyouts, very generous buyouts.
Well, you know what I'm talking about.
It sounds like you're saying, Carl, though, that, in order to shrink government, they have to fire. They can only fire people who are not veterans. Is that like their jobs are?
Tom, I'm saying that all these people voted for Trump didn't know what they were getting. That's what I'm saying. And that you're starting to see this in the polls. And in the aggregate, they like it. As Sean points out, should the government be shrunk? People say yes. Is the country on the right track? More people say it's on the right track now than before. So there's polling that shows that these policies that Donald Trump is pursuing are generally, people think they're good ideas, but they have to be done carefully. So
I still say no one voted for higher tariffs on Canada than China.
Well, nobody voted for high tariffs on Scotch whiskey or Irish whiskey either.
Yeah, I think
didn't vote for that.
I actually think Trump could have driven the economy into the ground with 1,000% tariffs on China, and people would have said okay, because they think of China as an unfriendly country. And I think he could have gone hard against Mexico, and been okay. Like, people are less antagonistic towards Mexico than China, but Canada's a friend. Everyone thinks of them as a friend. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're getting. Maybe
Right.
we are getting ripped off. But you have to lay that
hockey game,
groundwork.
Sean. We threw down with Canada. They're not friendly
Oh,
at all.
oh my gosh, there was fighting at a hockey game. Fans were booing the other team. That's shocking. No, come on. No groundwork has been laid for why we should be treating Canada more harshly than China. And I think that sets off alarm. That sets alarm bells off on me. Like, I don't like tariffs in general. I'm pretty free trade. But like, if Trump had gotten into a trade war with China, said, well, this is what people voted for. And there's strategic reasons to want to try to make us not dependent on a manufacturing chain based in a country we could be at war with at some point.
Okay, Tom, what he said.
Anyway.
Yeah, but look, I mean, there was a story today about the hundreds of millions of dollars are pouring into the US. They're going to build, semiconductor factories. And we have gotten, basically immigration to the southern border has gone down to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Fentanyl traffic at both borders has gone down to nothing. So Trump, I mean, he has used tariffs. Now, has it been without turbulence? No, of course not. But he has changed people's behaviors. He has gotten some of his goals accomplished through these threats. And it's none of these tariffs have actually taken effect yet, by the way. April 2nd is when they're going to go into effect. Like, none of these things have actually happened. They've all been talked about. And so maybe maybe this is just, that's all it is. He's talking a big game, and we end up not tariffing, and we're carving things out as making exceptions. And I don't know. I just don't know that I think it's too early to declare it a total disaster that's going to,
but Tom,
put him in the tank.
But remember, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, why do people have a basis for forming a judgment about Trump that this is not exactly what they bargained for? That's all. I'm not saying they're bad policies, although I would have to check your facts on one thing. I know of no evidence that fentanyl is not coming to this country anymore. I
think it's way down.
What is?
I think the fentanyl traffic is way down.
It's an illegal product. How do you know it's way down?
Because I've read stories as such.
You can't believe what you read.
Can't believe the media.
You're the one who always tells me that.
That is true, actually. It's too good, so I need to check it, right, Carl?
I don't know, Tom. All right. Drugs come into the country.
Okay, Sean.
The fentanyl thing with Canada was a pretext. I think what Trump really is mad about are some of Canada's protectionist policies. Okay. But he didn't run on that. That's Sean's point.
And I do think the number of tariffs that Canada has on the US is pretty small, actually, as a percentage of the overall trade that we do with them. All right, Sean, got about 30 seconds left. I'm going to give you the last word here, which is, as you see this trajectory, it's still early, but we've got elections coming up in November for governor, New Jersey, Virginia. Your early take on the House, slim majority there, the Senate, the retirements that have taken place. Which way is the needle trending? Favor of the Democrats, favor of the Republicans?
Oh yeah, I mean, you'd rather be the Democrats than the Republicans right now. I mean,
really, even with a 22% favorable rating?
Yeah, I mean the Republicans were not well liked in 2010, and they had the best midterm election for a party since 1938. Elections are referenda on the party in power. Democrats only have to get 2 seats in the House to gain control. So, and the average, there have been 3 elections, 3 midterm elections since the Civil War where the president's party didn't lose seats in the election. So you'd like them in the House. They aren't going to take the Senate. This is probably the right year for them to have all those vacancies and swing Senate seats. Um, but we'll have a much better idea after Virginia and New Jersey vote.
All right. We will leave it there. Sean Trendy, Carl Cannon. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder, president of RCP. We're going to take another quick break. When we get back, Carl's going to talk to Phil Wegmann about Donald Trump. We'll be back after this.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, talking now with Phil Wegmann, Real Clear Politics White House correspondent. And there's going to be a book in this when you're done, Phil, the first 100 days. That phrase goes back to FDR, but I wasn't alive when Franklin Roosevelt was president. My dad was a little kid. Actually, my dad wasn't born when Roosevelt was elected the first time. But I don't think we've ever seen anything like it since then, the way this guy's gotten off to a start. And so what I'm going to ask you about sort of the news of the day. I'm going to ask you about the Department of Education. But first of all, just tell us a little bit what it's been like, this fire hose. You cover the White House for us.
A fire hose is a good analogy, except for the fact that Donald Trump is lighting just about everything on fire. I mean, his long march through the administrative state continues, and this is Donald Trump pushing the envelope each day, every day, both in terms of what he can achieve with his mandate politically, and then also what he can achieve legally. And we've seen him move quickly and sort of do everything he can as an executive to dismantle some of these agencies, and then basically put the onus on Congress to codify, his shuttering of U.S. aid, or his, perhaps today his shutting down of the Department of Education. But this is really Donald Trump pushing his theory of executive authority as far as it can go.
So everything he's done that I think of that's made news, and a lot of things that hasn't made news have ended up in the courts. This will too. But tell us the latest about the Department of Education. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about that.
So today, Donald Trump is expected to sign this executive order dismantling the Department of Education. He's not ending it, of course, because that would require congressional action. This is something that was created by law. But Donald Trump is working within the margins to effectively shutter it. There was a similar playbook that they ran during the first Trump administration with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They had a lot more leeway when they were trying to shut down the CFPB, because that government agency didn't take its funding from Congress. It was set up to be apart from all of the other executive agencies, and so they could sort of do with it what they wanted. The Department of Education is different. It's been around all of my life, certainly, since the end of the Carter administration, and they know that there's only so much that they can do, but they're going to do everything that they can to effectively hobble it. And Trump, he's been promising that he's going to do away with the education department since his first campaign. This is something that conservatives have long wanted, going back to the Reagan administration. And, the argument that sort of settled in Trump's mind, his favorite argument when it comes to the Department of Education, is that the United States is first in spending, and yet we have fallen behind in reading, math, and science. That's the argument for him, that it's inefficient and it should be turned over to the states.
Well, why does he think the states will do better? I understand that the federalism argument. It's mainstream conservatism. It has been since Donald Trump was a Democrat. But you look at some of these school districts. I think of Chicago, New York, Los Angeles. These school districts. I used to cover the schools in California, Phil, when I was a young reporter, younger than you are now. I covered the LA busing case and the San Diego Unified School District, and most of these teachers are on the front lines. They're working hard. They're doing their best. They would tell you that we're asking the schools to solve socioeconomic problems that predate the Civil War, but what the conservative argument is that the money's being spent, all this federal money, and it doesn't seem to be helping. That presupposes that things can't get any worse, but maybe they can get worse. To me, it's it's a theory, do away, it's a slogan, do away with the Department of Education. But what, test scores could go down, truancy could go up. These things could get worse before they get better. And I wonder if Donald Trump really just thinks the federal government just shouldn't have a role in it, period.
Yeah, and the slogans are catching up with reality, as you pointed out, because it was very easy for Republican candidates to say, "Oh, I'm going to do away with the Department of Education, what the Heritage Foundation wants." But now the rubber's going to meet the road, and this federalism question makes sense on a white paper, but when it's individuals' lives, that's something different. And so, parents in a state that does very well in education, like Iowa, maybe this doesn't affect them that much. But Illinois, perhaps these Department of Education dollars were needed. Now, the argument from the right, though, is that this money from the education department is not actually going to teachers. It's not actually going to help individual students. Instead, it has created this administrative leviathan and a lot of bureaucracy. But we're going to get an answer one way or the other. I'm curious, if members of Congress are actually, if they have the stomach for this kind of vote to shutter it permanently. I'm doubtful. But for the next 3.5 years, if Trump has his way and this isn't shut down by court, then there will be this question of, all right, did Indiana have a better educational outcome than Illinois? He seems to be putting this back on the states.
Well, you mentioned Illinois, that's Chicago, which is the largest school district in that state and one of the largest in the country. They got all this money from COVID. The Biden administration just funneled billions of dollars to the states. And a lot of it went to, I don't want to say teachers' unions. That's not quite precise. But a lot of it went to teacher salaries. And in Chicago, Mayor Brandon Johnson was part of this. He wasn't mayor then, but it was to give teachers raises and add more DEI officers and more administrative, not even resource teachers, not take this money and just plug it into the schools and the kids who were having trouble reading and math at an early age. And then the teachers, they didn't want to go back to work. You had this remote learning that has proven to be a disaster for at-risk kids.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's a long speech I'm giving you, but let me ask you if you agree with me, and I know I'm your boss and your editor, so but feel free to disagree. That the behavior of some of these big city districts like Chicago, the sort of wasteful spending, the profligate spending, just made it easier for Trump to do this. The politics of it don't favor the teachers as much as they used to. I guess that's my impression. What do you think?
No, I think you're right. And I think we can even expand the aperture a little bit here and talk about institutions generally. As Donald Trump is attacking not just the Department of Education, we're coming off of everything that happened during COVID, where you saw parents questioning teachers because they had a upfront look at what their kids were learning. Something similar has happened with Trump's war against the White House Correspondents Association. After COVID and after the Biden administration, there's very little trust in the press corps. There's a similar argument for U.S. aid, for any number of these institutions where he can say, all right, this is what it is supposed to be doing ostensibly, but what we have seen is it's doing something else. And at a moment when trust in institutions is very low, that gives him kind of a free hand. The question is going to be what comes after, like we said earlier. And are kids going to be caught in the crossfire of this, or are some of these states going to step up?
All right. So Department of Education, he actually he sort of attacked the U.S., international aid, USAID first. I wasn't sure why. He's got some Pam Bondi and some of her henchmen at the Justice Department are, going after prosecutors that Trump thinks had it in for him. Kash Patel, I'm not sure what he's doing at the FBI. What else? Kristi Noem is going after whistleblowers, whistleblowers, not the right word. Guys who broke the law and tipped off local law enforcement to ICE raids. Actually, I don't mean to. All right, and then Department of Education, which Donald Trump, I've said so on this radio show, his face would light up on the campaign trail. That wasn't a throwaway line. He'd say, "I can't wait to get rid of that agency." I don't know what he had against it. I think he thought it was playing to the crowd, as you're saying. But all right, here's my question. What's next?
Yeah, it's $1 million question, but I think that with Trump, if we're looking for predictions of what's going to happen in the future. We need to look at the past. And what I've been struck by is that there have been very few throwaway lines when it comes to Donald Trump. The things that he says on the campaign trail often end up being reality. And I think that's a reflection of a president who's much more certain of himself than he was last time. His first 4 years, he was an amateur. By his own admission, he didn't know a lot of people in Washington, D.C. Now, not only is he much more certain, I think, of his own agenda, but he's surrounded by people who are entirely bought in. And I think that's the difference here. So when Donald Trump, teases stepping away from NATO, or teases stepping away from the UN. I think that the old adage is that you're supposed to take him seriously, but not literally. These days, I think it's both.
I was going to say that was Selena Zito's great line from the 2016 campaign. All right, I got a couple more questions. We've been seeing this DEI thing at the Pentagon. How closely have you been following this, purging the Pentagon website of I don't know, the code talkers, Isaac Hayes? They had to restore that. Maybe,
and Jackie Robinson as well.
Yeah, Jackie Robinson. I'd like to take credit for the Isaac Hayes thing. I wrote a blistering column. They changed it within hours. Maybe I'm sure I wasn't alone. Jackie Robinson. Yeah, well, they restored that one too. All right. Now I know that you don't cover the Pentagon, but Trump has said something that made me think that he thinks that some of these orders are being followed maliciously by people trying to undermine the policy. But another theory I've heard is that there's just an algorithm. These guys are using, I don't know, AI or just some computer program and going after these things. They're purging pages that they've never seen.
Yeah, I think it could be a little bit of both.
What's your bet? Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking to folks inside of the administration, not on this Pentagon issue, but on others. They are of the opinion that it is either malcompliance, and you have a longtime career bureaucrat who is going to follow an order, not just to the letter of the law, but to the moment of maximum pain, and they're going to try and embarrass the administration. Perhaps this is what we saw when the CIA sent that list of names of new hires to the White House. The other is, though, the Doge folks have been moving very quickly through an algorithm, through computer programs. There's been efforts to take, these big swings at the agencies, but not with a scalpel. And I think that perhaps some of these examples that we saw at the Pentagon, for instance, what makes me think of that could have been algorithm based is that, photos of the Enola Gay, the bomber that dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those were purged. And so that makes me think that maybe this is some sort of computer black magic run amok. But they're gonna have to solve this, because these are small details that add up to the larger tapestry of sometimes Doge is going too fast. These are sort of like the flourishes that go along with what we've seen elsewhere, where Doge just fired all of the folks who were responsible for maintaining the nuclear arsenal. I mean, there's a picture coming together, and I think that's why you saw Trump dial back Musk and say, all right, the cuts, Musk can recommend them, but the individual agencies make them.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you. You've been listening to Phil Wegmann, White House correspondent for Real Clear Politics. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington bureau chief for RCP. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time, 3 p.m. in California and 6 p.m. here in the East. Have a good evening.